Indiscriminate means they don't care if they're just bombing a civilian building. They're just trying to flatten Gaza. Is that what you think is happening?
70% of Gaza has been flattened.
Yes.
In what way would you not think that suggests a degree of indiscriminate bombing?
Hello everyone, Insightful Nomad here, and in today's video, the master of outrage, Piers Morgan, who thinks he's doing us a great service with the open discussion and debate that he fosters on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by bringing in the most radical, loud, rude people onto his show so that they scream at each other. And the guy thinks that he's actually intelligent and unbiased on the matter. But it turns out that Piers really isn't as smart as he thinks, as we can see in this clip with Konstantin Kisin.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, and it's just, we're exploring the arguments. Why you've used the phrase indiscriminate bombing repeatedly. Why do you say it's indiscriminate?
I'll give an example. Say they get information there's one Hamas terrorist. Right? I saw Dave Smith use this analogy, so let me give him the credit for it.
Oh,
if somebody
Dave Smith
murdered one of your family.
Dave Smith gave the analogy. Well, it must be legit now.
Okay? Horrible hypothetical, but let's assume this has happened. And you get told that one of the people who was responsible is living in a tower block with 150 people in it. Do you think it's justified to go and blow up the whole tower block and kill 149 innocent people as you kill the one person who is responsible for the loss you suffered?
There's a calculation in the laws of war where there has got to be some proportionality. There's got to be some taken into account.
Do you think there's been any proportionality now in Israel's response?
Well, what I
mean, 1,200 people got killed.
What I'm asking you
over the 7th. We're now up to maybe as many as 100,000.
But Piers, with all respect, that's a terrible argument. Because,
is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
That's a terrible argument.
I don't think it is.
It is, because way more Germans were killed at the end of World War II than British people were killed, and yet we bombed Germany into the ground because we were defeating them, right? I think that is a terrible argument, but I'm trying to find out why you say it's indiscriminate. Indiscriminate means they don't care if they're just bombing a civilian building. They're just trying to flatten Gaza. Is that what you think is happening?
70% of Gaza has been flattened.
Yes.
In what way would you not think that suggests a degree of indiscriminate bombing?
The reason that people would challenge the idea of it being indiscriminate, for example, Andrew Fox, as I mentioned, who has a very nuanced view of this, as we found out, he was saying that when he was in Gaza, what he saw was that Hamas adapted their tactics as the war went on, and when they realized that the Israeli IDF was going house to house, they then did the evacuation themselves. They pulled the civilians out and then booby-trapped every single building. So the destruction of a lot of buildings is evidence of the fact that a lot of them are booby-trapped, and that's why they're being destroyed.
I'm sure some of them were.
He made the point that more bombs have been dropped on Gaza than the number of people who've been killed in Gaza, which kind of tells you that it's his argument, not indiscriminate. So that's the only reason I'm asking. And I'm genuinely just wondering.
I've read some of the 5-6 times as many bombs have been dropped in totality than the total power of the 2 nuclear bombs dropped in Japan. I mean, you know, what is indiscriminate? To me, you can argue that indiscriminate means you don't care at all. I wouldn't go as far as that.
Okay.
But I would say that the way they have gone about targeting sometimes individual members of Hamas that they believe are in a cafe and they just blow the whole cafe to pieces, that shows in my opinion, a reckless disregard for civilian life that is around that one person. And again, I come back to the Hezbollah thing. Why is it that they can target Hezbollah and dismantle Hezbollah in such a brilliantly sophisticated surgical strike manner, which does not involve destroying Lebanon or wiping out 100,000 Lebanese people, you know, killing 20,000 Lebanese children? Why is it they're capable of that there, but they're completely incapable of any other war strategy here, when most people believe, who know Hamas, that this was all part of Hamas's plan, that they knew when they did what they did, this is what would happen?
Because the argument would be, and by the way, I have family who come from Lebanon, is that Hezbollah are concentrated in one particular part of Lebanon. They're not concentrated.
Well, Israel didn't blow it up.
But if you look at Gaza, it's very, very densely populated, and Hamas are physically embedded within that.
Sure.
They have consciously embedded themselves, as we all know, within the civilians.
Sure.
So it's almost impossible to be able to target them.
But if Hamas is showing such a spectacular disregard for its own civilian life, then I would argue that you should always, if you're in Israel's position as the only democracy in the region, and you've got the biggest military in the region, it's even more incumbent on you not to be as reckless with civilian life as the people that you're going after.
All right, Piers Morgan. Well, a couple of things about what you said. First of all, regarding the Lebanon-Gaza comparison, it's the same IDF. It's the same IDF operating in Lebanon as is operating in Gaza, as in operating in Iran in the recent war. And we saw very different results. Why would the same people with the same operating procedures in one instance pursue things, in a way that is able to minimize so much the civilian casualties, but in the other instance, you have such severe civilian casualties when they're doing it's the same planes, it's the same weapons, it's the same soldiers. The soldiers often rotate between different parts. So, the same soldier can do one tour in, the north, or one part of the war in Lebanon, and then another part of the war he could be in Gaza. How do you account for such a spectacular difference? Well, there's a pretty easy way to do it when you see how different the terrain is in those different scenarios, where Hezbollah is concentrated in a very specific part of Beirut and in certain villages in southern Lebanon, and villages, not like high-rise buildings like in Gaza. And we saw that, for example, in the Maronite villages in southern Lebanon, Christian villages, they were completely unscathed because there was no Hezbollah in the vicinity. It was much easier to infiltrate the organization with the Beeper operation. So that the terrain is completely different, which accounts for a lot of the difference. More importantly, I would say, regarding that analogy that he gave, the Dave Smith analogy. Ooh, the Dave Smith. Dave Smith, the comedian, gave an analogy, so it must really, really be correct. The Dave Smith analogy of, you have one Hamas member in a building of 150 people, so we blow up the entire building. That would be unjustified. But that's not what Israel has been doing. And actually, Israel has many times called off such operations because of the disproportionate collateral damage that would come from it. There's a very famous case that was, I don't know, around 10 years ago or more, I think even more, where literally the entire Hamas leadership was in a building and Israel knew about it and wanted to conduct a strike. And they knew from their intelligence that the room they were in was one of these heavily fortified concrete rooms. And in order to have a bunker buster missile to get through the room and to take out the entire leadership, they would have to use a much, much heavier type of munition, bunker buster, in order to achieve that, which would potentially level the entire building. What did Israel do? They called off the strike. They didn't do it. And I'm talking about, they had their, Mohammed Def, who they've been trying to get for so many times, the person from the intelligence, but like the entire echelon of the top of Hamas leadership. This is before the October 7th and the whole war. This is way before, and you can read about this, was there. This, would have been a decapitating blow to Hamas, and Israel didn't pursue it because they knew they would probably flatten the entire building and kill, like, I don't know, 200 Gazan civilians. So they decided not to do it. And there are a lot of examples of this. So this idea that Israel doesn't take that into calculation at all is simply not true. It's true that, yeah, in the wars of proportionality, if you have several Hamas fighters and you have civilians nearby, you are allowed to target them. And if the civilians are killed, that's called collateral damage in war. But the way he's presenting it, like he didn't even say that's disproportionate there. He's saying it's indiscriminate. It's completely indiscriminate. And the example he gave is the high level of Palestinian civilian casualties, even though he didn't mention the ratio, right, which is more important in order to see if it's indiscriminate or not. And Konstantin Kisin just shut him up immediately when he showed how many Germans were killed in the Second World War versus how many British. And of course, so much higher, so many more Germans were killed than British. But that doesn't mean that the British were the bad guys in the war. And they were more indiscriminate in that war than what Israel is. I mean, they bombed Dresden to smithereens. at the end of the war. In the Normandy invasion, they were bombing villages left and right with civilians in it, even civilians who weren't German necessarily, in order to get at the German installations. But the Dave Smith argument, I call it the Dave Smith argument that, okay, if there's one Hamas member, then Israel will flatten an entire cafe or flatten an entire building, is not borne out by reality. But Piers Morgan is not informed enough or clever enough in order to know those facts. All right, guys. See you next time.